I'm Jason Stephenson, the Director of Secondary English Language Arts here at the State Department of Education. And before I was in this role, I was a high school English teacher at Deer Creek High School, where I served on the Standards Writing Committee.
And I'm Brooke Meiller. I'm the Executive Director of School Support and Improvement here at the State Department. And in my previous role, when I served on the State Standards Committee, I was the Director of Literacy for Norman Public Schools. And before that, I was a teacher, high school English teacher.
And we're here to talk to you guys today about Standard 5 language. And this is a standard that sometimes strikes fear in some English teachers' hearts just because it is all about grammar, or maybe there's something more to it. So we're going to explore that today, and we're going to start by hearing from Brooke kind of her grammar story, her journey in teaching grammar throughout the years.
Absolutely. So I think like a lot of people, when I first started teaching, I just looked at grammar kind of as a set of rules, a set of things that I needed students to practice in a way. I was teaching in 1986. That was my first year teaching, and so there was this grammar book. I don't even remember the title, but it was hugely thick. And grammar at my school at that time was really arranged into units. So I did a punctuation unit, and I did a parts of speech unit, and as a 10th grade teacher, parts of the sentence was really important, and we did a verbals unit, and it just went on and on and on, yet kids didn't know anything. And by the next year, they had to redo parts of speech again. So you know that's not right, and you just keep looking for things that will help you integrate that language study so that it sticks with our students. For me, that was a professional development with the College Board. And it was really the first time that I went to a summer institute as a pre-AP teacher, pre-advanced placement teacher. And I had a consultant that really helped us see, you don't teach grammar over here in isolation. You don't come up with these sentences for kids to identify. You just teach reading and you teach writing and you fold that language in. And I really learned how to do that summer, and then I taught that way from then on, and I've been trying to teach teachers to teach that way ever since.
So I maybe have a similar path in that whenever I first started teaching, I taught the way that I was taught, and it was through worksheets, and it was through, here's the list of rules, and we're going to have a quiz, or I'm going to mark up my students' papers with every single grammar error that they made and use my red pen. But what I found was that wasn't helping my students. They weren't integrating what I was wanting them to learn about different structures and types of sentences and where the comma goes and all of that. And what saved me in my teaching career was going to the Oklahoma Writing Project Summer Institute. And it was there that I learned about kind of the same thing you were talking about, folding grammar in to lessons of reading and writing, and to put the responsibility of figuring out how to fix those sentences with mechanical errors, usage errors, back in the student's court. So this was one tip that I learned, was instead of me identifying grammatical errors, instead make a little dot at the end of the line of the essay to indicate if there's a major error that you want your students to go back and find and correct themselves. If there are 2 major errors, put 2 dots. If there are 3 errors, put 3, and put it back on the students to find, so that they're the ones becoming better editors. Because we as English teachers, we already know how to edit things. It's our students.
That's right. And they're just taking all your edits and fixing those and not learning a thing.
Or they're just saying, here was how I scored on the paper, and I'm throwing it in the trash, which that was just something that I could not handle at first. Another thing, too, as far as teaching grammar, the reputation that we have as English teachers, is sometimes people will say, oh, don't judge my grammar. Like, that's the first thing that they say to us sometimes when they get to know us or what we do.
I'm afraid to send you an email.
Right.
I'll have something wrong in the email.
And I just wish we didn't have that reputation as educators, that we're going to come down harshly on people, because language is designed for different purposes, different audiences, and I make typos sometimes in the emails that I send and the tweets that I make, and you just have to move on because sometimes something needs to be super polished, and sometimes there might be a few mistakes. In our classrooms, though, we're wanting our students to show off what they know and to have really polished grammar skills. But one thing that kind of changed the way that I thought about grammar was listening to the Grammar Girl podcast, and she presented this notion of prescriptivism and descriptivism when it comes to grammar. So prescriptivism is enforcing every rule and saying that language is static, that it doesn't change. And this is maybe the reputation that those English teachers who are marking everything up with red pens have.
Right.
But a descriptivist simply describes what language is doing and is more of a believer that language is fluid and it's changing over time. And one example that I can think of that is like people saying in the past decade or so, like adulting is hard, like being an adult. But that kind of structure or word formation didn't exist whenever I was growing up. And so language does change. So I try to be a little more forgiving or understanding whenever I see structures or words or choices that my student writers were making, if I felt like it was in keeping with how language was evolving or changing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think about when your structure is perfect, sometimes you actually lose meaning. So I just rewatched a wonderful movie called Saving Mr. Banks.
Yes,
And
I've seen it.
They're talking about writing the song Let's Go Fly a Kite. And it's just so wonderful, and they're singing and they're happy. And then all of a sudden someone says, really, it should be let us go and fly a kite. And they try to sing that sentence, and it's just terrible. And the whole tone and the mood is just lost. And so that's another part of that descriptivist of what do I want my language to do? What do I want my message to be? And maybe that structure is going to change my message.
So that's really getting into the nitty-gritty of what Standard 5 language is all about.
Absolutely.
So we're going to look right now at an example from 6th grade in Standard 5.
Okay.
And so those objectives there are divided into the reading and writing strand. And really what Standard 5 is all about is students will apply knowledge of grammar and rhetorical style to reading and writing. So do you want to talk about reading strand or writing strand?
I'll talk about the reading strand.
Okay.
So when I think about one of these objectives is that students will recognize different types of sentences that signal relationships. And so I think about when we put text in front of students and we really just even focus on just what's the sentence structure, how many of these sentences are simple, how many are complex, how many are compound complex, and so on. And then always ask the question, and what is the effect of that? So identify what you see and then ask, and what is the effect of that? And I think what's so exciting is that students begin to see sometimes the simple sentence is the most effective sentence in the passage because of what it does, because of what it evokes. And that's exciting.
And its placement. Maybe
And
it
its
comes at the
placement.
very end after
Sure.
a long series of compound or complex sentences.
Right.
And really, whenever we're asking our students, what is the effect, we're moving away from DOK1 of I've
Absolutely.
identified this sentence as a simple sentence,
Sure.
but now we're saying, what is the effect? So that's how we get our students to be more critical thinkers as readers and then also writers. So in the writing strand here in Standard 5, this is all about students demonstrating their command of standard English grammar and usage throughout their writing. And so if we look at these objectives here, one of them is about recognizing and correcting vague pronoun usage. And that may seem to some people like, do we really need to work on that? But this is all about being clear and creating clarity in writing. And I'm a person who in my writing sometimes has vague pronouns, and I go back and have to correct that. So it's teaching our students to just be clear in how they're communicating, because we don't want their message to be lost.
Right.
And so that's just one example here in Standard 5 for 6th grade. So we thought right now that we talk about how can we actually apply this in like a lesson. And we looked at an opening paragraph from Highlights magazine, and we noticed that it used a series of dashes and adjectives, and we thought, let's look at the example sentence and then we could imitate that in our own writing. So I guess we'll start with looking at the mentor, or do you want to just read your imitation of it?
So why don't I read the mentor
Okay,
text,
great.
what we're calling the mentor text being the one that we want students to understand because of its content, but then we also want to use it for them to imitate.
The rhetorical
and
style or the structure.
Style, the structure, whatever it might be, in their own writing. So the original paragraph from the Highlights article says, as a company that helps children become their best selves, curious, creative, caring, and confident, we want kids to understand the importance of having moral courage. Moral courage means standing up for what we believe is right, honest, and ethical, even when it is hard. There is so much language to unpack in that. And I really think that depending on the age of student, you could start as young as third grade with that and just talk about how many sentences are there. There's two.
Right? Just two
There's
sentences.
So let's now go write something that we care about and use two sentences. It can be that simple in terms of helping them see how the language and the structure is working. But as students get older, what would you focus on with maybe a sixth grade class, Jason?
We could identify the types of sentences that are used here, a complex sentence, another complex sentence, it looks like, at a cursory glance, and then imitating that same kind of structure of saying, now I'm going to write two complex sentences. And then as students get even older, even though dashes aren't in our Oklahoma academic standards for language, we could still probably have high school students notice this use of M dashes here in this passage.
And what the effect of those dashes are.
Right, because this would be something that is set apart and it's stronger than a comma, stronger than a colon. You can't use colons the way these dashes are being used, and we could challenge students to use some dashes in their writing as well, which is what you and I did in our imitation sentences. So do you want to share yours first?
Absolutely. So I tried to imitate this sentence pretty closely in terms of using the dash and how many sentences I wrote and the structure of those sentences.
Okay.
So my imitation is, as someone who cares deeply about education, authentic, valued, equitable, and relevant, I want our country to have the courage to invest in children. I want to live in a world where we don't question how much education costs, much like we don't question how much defense costs. No price is too high for our children's futures.
Hear, hear. I'm all,
I know, right?
I'm all excited.
But what's interesting, as I was writing that sentence and I kept going back to the mentor sentences, the mentor paragraph, it made me add more words. It made me be more thoughtful of my point and how do I get to that point in structuring. It made me play with language. And I think that's what our kids don't have time to do, is just play with language and go, wow, that's really neat. I could do that.
Yes, and we need to find that time in our classrooms for our students to get to play with words and sentences and see the effects. So I kind of had a similar experience in crafting my imitation, that I was trying to get the dashes in and the series of adjectives and making sure that it flowed well. And so here's what I came up with for mine. When I started my first year of teaching, excited, nervous, hopeful, and overwhelmed, the only thing that boosted my confidence was the tie around my neck. I couldn't manage a classroom, but I did know how to tie a half Windsor knot, something my students did not know. And so whenever I was writing that, it just brought back all these memories of that first year of like teachers saying, why are you wearing a tie? It's Friday. You can wear jeans and a t-shirt. And I was like, I need this tie, And so this would be like a launch into like writing a personal narrative if I wanted to use that. So I took a persuasive mentor text from Highlights Magazine and repurposed it for an opening paragraph for perhaps a personal narrative. So there we go.
Mine was repurposed to the opening paragraph of even a podcast. I mean, that would have been a great first sentence for a podcast,
Absolutely.
Right? Just to launch into what you care about. And I really feel like that Standard 5, because it's embedded in reading and writing, like all of them are, it's really intended to make us better readers and make us better writers. And so when we start having students examine a piece of text, yes, for its content, of course we want its content. That's why we're reading. But we also want
like Standard 3 literary analysis.
Correct.
Okay.
But we also want to talk about how did the author get that done? And so the way the author got that content across is Standard 5 in language. And we just have to keep saying that.
And just revisiting and re-examining text throughout the year where we can see the different moves, the craft moves, that those different writers made.
Absolutely. And I think you've got some resources for us in the curriculum guides.
Absolutely. So at the end of the standards booklet, there is a grammar companion that explains a lot of the different terms that our students are expected to know, gives example sentences of different kinds of sentences. And so that's just at the back of the standards booklet. And then also if you hop online to the curriculum framework, that grammar companion is pulled out separately in a smaller document if you want to access it that way. And then also the curriculum framework has different literacy progressions that show how the standards build over time and change throughout the grades. And there's even a punctuation literacy progression that shows by grade level what are the different punctuation marks expected at those different grade levels, as well as parts of speech. And if our students who have been working with these standards for a number of years now eventually, get through that vertical progression, then they're going to know these parts of speech. And when they get to ninth grade, hopefully our freshman English teachers are not having to teach our students what a preposition is, because our students will have been working with those for a number of years. So the frameworks are there as a resource, and we just really hope that teachers are able to use Standard 5 as a way to help their students become better readers and writers. And it's not necessarily all about, I found a predicate nominative in this sentence on a worksheet.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you all for listening, and we wish you luck with Standard 5.